The first paper session will be on the topic of death, grief, and mental health. Our first speaker is Steve Taylor from Leeds Beckett University in the UK. He will, in a moment, be talking on the subject of measuring enlightenment, the development of an inventory of secular spiritual wakefulness.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody. It's slightly daunting to be the first presenter of the conference, but at least I'll be able to relax after 15 minutes and enjoy the rest of the conference in a mode of calmness. So, hopefully it's slightly challenging to present this research in 15 minutes because this is a project which is, it's a very kind of long process. It's taken 7 years to create this, or to complete this research project. We completed it recently, a couple of weeks ago, actually. Well, when it was accepted by, the paper based on our project was accepted by the Journal of Humanistic Psychology. But it began back in 2016. It was initiated by myself and a researcher called Kelly Kilray, who's based at St. Paul's University in Ottawa, in Canada. So we'd been doing research. We found out that we'd independently been doing research in a similar area. We'd both been investigating what is sometimes called enlightenment. We prefer to call it wakefulness, but in popular parlance, the state is normally called enlightenment, which is actually originally a Buddhist term. It's a translation of a Buddhist term. And we decided that we would pool our research initially to try to highlight the characteristics of what it means to be enlightened. You know, people talk about being spiritually awakened or enlightened. What do they actually mean? So we decided to try to find out what those terms actually mean in terms of the characteristics of the state. So we've both been been doing qualitative research, interviewing people who claimed or reported or were said to experience this state. So we initially pulled our research to create a list of the characteristics of this state. Then we decided to create a scale. So we brought on board Cynthia Billadou also from St. Paul's University in Ottawa to help us with the statistics to create a scale. And 3 or 4 years ago, a team of German researchers from the Institute for Frontiers Areas of Psychology and Mental Health in Freiburg, which is a really fantastic research institute. So they came on board to help us validate the scale and also to create a German version of the scale. And as I say, the paper based on our research is just about to be published or has been accepted by the Journal of Humanistic Psychology. So first of all, what do we actually mean when we talk about this state called enlightenment or wakefulness? Well, every spiritual tradition in the world has a variation of an ideal state which, you know, all seekers who follow these practices or paths are meant to head towards. And all spiritual traditions have certain practices or certain paths, certain techniques which are designed to lead to this ideal state. So obviously it's conceived of in different ways in different traditions. Many traditions have both a temporary and ongoing variant of this state. In the Hindu tradition, it's sometimes referred to by samadhi, which literally means ecstasy. And samadhi can be a temporary experience, but it can also become an ongoing, everyday experience, which is integrated into everyday life, where it's called sahaja samadhi. So somebody who experiences sahaja samadhi would experience a constant state of ease or even bliss, and also a sense of connection or union with other beings and with the world itself. So there are similar distinctions in Sufism and Zen Buddhism, in lots of different traditions. In Taoism, for example, there is a discussion of a state called Ming, which is when a person attains union with the Tao. The Tao is the spiritual principle which is spoken of in Taoism. So in a state of Ming, the individual becomes one or lives in harmony with the Tao, and their life becomes a kind of easy, relaxed expression of the Tao. But it's also possible to speak about this state outside the context of spiritual traditions. That's what I've been trying to do in my research. I've been trying to research this state when it happens, often to people who don't know anything about spirituality, who don't follow any particular spiritual paths and practices. Often it's people who've gone through significant trauma or psychological turmoil in their lives, and they undergo a shift into a different state of being, which they don't really understand. Maybe later on they learn about spirituality and they think, oh, maybe I've had a spiritual awakening. But it can happen outside the context of those traditions. So we define wakefulness in a secular context as an ongoing state of expansive awareness and intensified perception. And it can be cultivated over a long period through certain practices and paths, or it can occur suddenly in a moment of transformation, often connected to intense psychological turmoil, which is what I've been researching over my years of writing and doing research. So there are certain characteristics which are associated with the state, a sense of well-being, which is why it connects to this session. That's probably the primary aspect of this state, a sense of ease, a sense of freedom from the normal kind of restless discord which human beings experience, the mental unease which seems to be a part of many human beings' lives. And there's also a sense of connection. People transcend a sense of separateness. They feel that somehow they are connected to other human beings, to the world itself. And generally there is a more intense perception of the phenomenal world. The world becomes more real, more beautiful. People become more appreciative of the basic aspects of human life and become free of the desire to accumulate more possessions and more wealth and so forth. So the state is a continuum. There's not a sudden cut-off point where a person becomes awakened or enlightened. There are actually lots of degrees of wakefulness. That's what we found in our research. And I think that I found in my research that a kind of low-intensity wakefulness is not so uncommon. Obviously, the more intense wakefulness becomes, the less common it becomes. So we felt that this scale was necessary because there's no previous scale. There are scales which measure certain aspects of wakefulness. There are certain scales which measure compassion or empathy or mindfulness and so forth. But there's no previous scale which covers all of the different aspects of wakefulness. It's also been, a very nebulous quality. If you asked different spiritual teachers what they mean by enlightenment, you probably get a different answer from every single person. And so when people engage in spiritual pursuits or spiritual seeking, they often don't have a clear idea of what they're heading towards. So it's useful to bring some clarity. Another issue is that spiritual seekers are often manipulated by gurus who claim to be awakened, that when they're actually quite narcissistic, deluded, or corrupt individuals. And mentioning no names, of course. But seriously, it's very disappointing. I sometimes think, I found that it is normally male gurus. I think, he seems like a genuine, compassionate spiritual teacher. At last, I found a good one. But then you found out a few months later that they've been engaged in corrupt behavior, sleeping with dozens of their female followers and extorting money from their followers. So it's a good idea for spiritual seekers to have an idea of how gurus should behave, what characteristics they should embody. And also, I think it's important to take spirituality away from religion, to portray it in a secular setting, because as I say, people often undergo the shift without a background of spirituality. And in some ways, you can see spiritual traditions, their concepts of enlightenment as, they have a kind of psychological underpinning which is often obscured by the concepts and beliefs that go with those traditions. So if you can sort of peel away the layers of cultural conditioning and the beliefs and traditions, then you can find a kind of essential psychological state. So I'll briefly cover how the scale was created. So first of all, as I mentioned earlier, Kelly and I combined our research and we identified 24 characteristics of wakefulness. A couple of them I've mentioned already: well-being, sense of connection and wholeness, intensified perception, reduced identification with thoughts, reduced disappearance of fear of death. So initially we created statements which describe these characteristics, and we gave them to 4 expert judges, including Peter Fenwick and David Lukoff, people who had a background in spirituality, but also a kind of scientific underpinning as well. So they helped us to fine-tune or to eliminate certain statements. And then we went through 2 pilot studies to test the statements. That resulted in some of them being omitted, some of them being amended, and so forth. And then we we rigorously tested the initial version of the scale with 278 participants. We also conducted a group study, a between-group study between a so-called awakened group and a normal group. And finally, after many levels of testing, we came up with a final 19-item scale. And even though we had 19 items, we found that we could still cover almost all of the aspects of the characteristics of wakefulness. We found that some characteristics incorporated each other or repeated each other. So the 19-item scale was a very concise and condensed way of covering all of the characteristics of wakefulness. And the between-group study gave us good results. Then we had a very good Cronbach's alpha score, by the way, of I think it was 0.89. Then the German questionnaire was created, tested with 366 participants. And one of the German members of our team, they tested the scale for correlations with other scales, like the Freiburg Mindfulness Inventory, the Big Five Neuroticism subscale. And we found strong correlations which added to the validity of the scale. But the German scale was reduced to 16 items. So there were 3 statements which didn't translate well, so they were omitted from the German version. So this is the final scale. If you want to quickly find out whether you're spiritually awakened, you can. So it's a Likert scale from 1 to 5. So it covers, as you can see, it covers most of the characteristics I've mentioned, all of them actually. I'll give you a few moments just to look over that. There are actually two items which are reversed. Maybe you can spot those. Anybody spot the reverse items? 19. Sorry? 19 is one of them. I feel pressured to act in certain ways to gain acceptance. And the other one is, when do you spot the other one? 15, that's right. I judge other people's behavior in my mind.
Steve, is that a yes, no, or is it a scale?
It's a scale, yeah, from 1 to 5. Number 18 is, I often have a sense of timelessness. That's true of me because of, obviously I'm going to overrun with this session. Okay, so that scale will soon be published in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology. It will soon be available as a research tool. And so the scale does find that wakefulness is a distinct state, a distinct psychological state. So I think we've succeeded in our aim of kind of taking the state away from spirituality, not taking it away, but kind of adapting it to a psychological perspective. And it shows that it is a distinct state of being which is different from the normal state which most human beings experience most of the time. So it's a valid and reliable instrument that can be used in future research. And we also found that it does exist on a continuum. So some people, interestingly, we're about to conduct a further study on people who've been meditating for long periods, for 20 years or more. So it'll be interesting to find out whether they have a generally high level of wakefulness. So yeah, it's exciting that there are lots of further applications of this research. It would be great to find out if there's a correlation between wakefulness and psi abilities. One would expect that there is. If you think in terms of the concept of transliminality, that Michael Falborn's concept of transliminality, you could describe people who experience wakefulness as having a very kind of labile, very soft, permeable state of being. So that would presumably give them access to psi abilities. People who show high levels of wakefulness do show very strong creative abilities. So one would expect them to show great psi abilities too. Also, the relationship between wakefulness and age. There's a Swedish psychologist called Lars Tornstam who developed a concept of duro-transcendence, which suggested a relationship between spirituality, a correlation between spirituality and increasing age. So the higher scale could hopefully measure that too. Also, psychedelics, psychotherapy, it would be a tool that psychotherapists could use. Finally, when I shared our research on my social media, I had quite a few negative reactions. I was disappointed that some spiritual seekers were a bit offended by it. They thought, why turn spirituality into a competition? Why put pressure on spiritual seekers? You can imagine some spiritual seekers, measuring themselves every few months to find out, oh, I'm not as awakened as I thought I was. My wakefulness has actually gone down. So that could be a potentially difficult area. But I think in general, the positive aspects of it, the clarity which we provide through this scale can provide significant benefits. Thank you.